I voted for him and I want to support him, but I do have a major problem with him doing this. And I'm not going to support everything that he puts forward. So it's like I'm trying to weigh out, the positive and bad.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I do have a couple of clips from Donald Trump about the post office. As you know, back in 2018, his Office of Management and Budget released a plan to privatize the Postal Service, indicating that, Trump supports privatization of the Postal Service. He was asked about it recently, and this is what he had to say.
Billions.
Well, there is talk about the Postal Service being taken private. You do know that. Not the worst idea I've ever heard. It really isn't. It's a lot different today with between Amazon and UPS and FedEx and all the things that you didn't have. But there is talk about that. It's an idea that a lot of people have liked for a long time. We're looking at it. I think we're looking at that along with a lot of
So there you go, looking at it very strongly, as they say. And it, it's not good. We've had a couple of letter carriers who are, Trump supporters who said that first they disputed that Trump did support privatization, and apparently they were not, like following politics or something in 2018, and they didn't realize that Trump had put out a plan to privatize the Postal Service, and so then they just kind of retreated to like, it's probably not going to happen. So I don't know. We'll see. Again, like I said before, when we talked about it, I if I were to bet, I would say that he's not going to be able to get away with privatizing the Postal Service just because it would be such a heavy lift. It would require Congress, and I don't think that you are going to be able to get Congress to be on board with that, especially because I don't think you could get something like privatizing the Postal Service through reconciliation. So you'd have to get 60 votes in the Senate, which the Republicans definitely don't have, to privatize the Postal Service. And just as a reminder for why that would be bad, right? The Postal Service is the only delivering entity that has a universal coverage requirement. The Postal Service is required to visit every single house in the United States every day, basically, and does that. And does that. I mean, that is, when we talk about government efficiency, think about the idea that we have every single day, a representative of the federal government visiting every single household. I mean, that is pretty remarkable. And that happens, generally speaking, without a hitch, very quickly, again, generally speaking, and very efficiently and very cheaply. It costs 67 cents to send a letter through the Postal Service. If you were to do the same thing through like UPS, DHL, or FedEx, it would be like $20 to send a letter, right? So it's just not privatization of the Postal Service would significantly hurt rural voters, rural citizens in particular, because the further out you are from a major metropolitan area, the more likely that service to your house will be on the chopping block sooner rather than later. It will hurt people whose medicine comes through the mail. It will hurt small businesses who rely on cheap shipping from the Postal Service. It will also harm competition because UPS and FedEx and DHL have to compete with the Postal Service, which does not have to post a profit, which does not have to basically, and remember what a profit is basically a tax on consumers to pay shareholders. That's all that profit is, right? So the Postal Service doesn't have to do that. The Postal Service does not have to run a profit and pay shareholders billions of dollars a year. They don't have to pay a CEO tens of millions of dollars a year. They're able to do this as a public service. And so because we have this shipping agency that has to operate as a public service and does not have a responsibility to shareholders to deliver profits, then that UPS has to compete with the Postal Service. If the Postal Service is privatized and has to begin running a profit so that it can pay shareholders and leeches and CEOs, then they are going to have to increase prices, which will allow UPS and FedEx and DHL to further increase prices. So it'll be very bad. It would be very bad to privatize the Postal Service. I don't anticipate that that Trump will be able to get it done because the margins are so slim in the House and the Senate. But he wants to. He wants to. And that is a bad instinct that he has. And we need to recognize that. And we need to recognize that nobody around him is pushing back against that, as far as we can tell. Elon Musk is obviously going to be in support of it. Vivek Ramaswamy is obviously going to be in support of it. And so who are the people that are going to be around him to try to push back against that? It's very, very concerning. And the instinct generally is the concerning thing, right? Because I do think that Congress is probably not going to allow that to happen. But because of this instinct to privatize things, that's going to be his solution to every problem in the federal government, right? Is that we want to increase privatization, and we want to put a profit tax on consumers. We want to put a profit tax on people who receive these government services, and so that we can make wealthy people more wealthy. Not good, folks. And just as and we've got a caller on the line, and we're going to get to them here in just a second. Appreciate the call. And just as to address one argument that I saw, which is an argument that we should wrestle with, right? When we're talking about the privatization thing. In the comment section of one of our videos, somebody said something about, UPS workers, even though UPS is a private company, UPS workers actually make more money than Postal Service workers, and they have a right to strike. And almost certainly that's correlated, and indeed it is. Almost certainly the right of UPS workers to strike is a part of the reason that they have higher compensation on average than Postal Service workers. But and so then the question is, would it not maybe be better for postal workers? Maybe we can set aside the question about service to the American people, which I think you would have a very, very difficult time making the case that service to the American people by the Postal Service would be increased rather than degraded by privatization. I think that's a very tough case to make. Maybe you can make it. I don't think you can. But let's set that aside and say maybe it would be better for the workers if it was private. My rebuttal to that is to ask a question. There's been lots of privatization across the country. States have privatized different things. School systems have contracted out services. Other countries have privatized certain things. Point to me a single one instance in which the privatization of these services has resulted in improved working conditions and wages for the workers involved. I cannot point to any, and in fact, I can show you that basically every time that this does happen, working conditions and wages generally fall. We can look just immediately. A couple of weeks ago, there was the University of Central Florida privatized, if I'm remembering correctly, 400 janitorial staff. They sold the janitorial portion of their college to a private company. This happened because of Florida's anti-public sector union law that decertified the sanitation union. And so because the union was decertified, the contract was therefore null and void, and therefore the college could just sell off this portion of its product and say, here, run this for us, private company, and immediately the pension was frozen. No more contributions to the pension for the workers who have been working there, in some cases, 15, 20 years. Every single new worker for the janitorial staff at the University of Central Florida will no longer receive a pension. Immediately, right? Immediately. The same thing happened at the Huntsville City Schools when they started contracting stuff out, right? The people who work at these contractors no longer have access to the retirement systems of Alabama. I don't know much else about their working conditions, but as somebody who has family that are contract staff for Huntsville City Schools, I can tell you that they do not have access to the retirement systems of Alabama. And so you should be very skeptical as an employee of the Postal Service that privatization will be good for you. And that's just on the pension. I mean, the pension would almost certainly immediately be gone. Also, you would be facing significant job cuts. That would be one of the first things that they try to do to try to make it profitable so that they could pay wealthy people lots of money off of the value that you create. They would cut a lot of jobs. They would try to make you do more money. You wouldn't get a pension. Probably your health care would be worse. Maybe you could strike and stop it. That would be what you would have to do. Maybe you could strike and stop it, but it would be very difficult. It would be a very difficult fight. Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate. We got a couple of callers now on the line. 2 callers. Let's start with the first one from a 715 area code. Caller from a 715 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name's Harley, and I'm in the Midwest, and it's currently 11 degrees out on the mail route. Feels like 1.
Any thoughts on the privatization stuff? And any other thoughts? I think that you were one of them that called in about, or that we had talked to previously about the privatization stuff. Does Trump kind of reiterating his support for privatization of the Postal Service concern you at all, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Obviously, I voted for him, and I want to support him, but I do have a major problem with him doing this. And I'm not going to support everything that he puts forward. So it's like I'm trying to weigh out, the positive and bad. So the more I hear that he's trying to push privatization, if I could find elected officials or people I know through my local county party to then somehow talk to them and push against privatization, I definitely will. I don't think there's many positives. I heard you out talking about it, and I've heard it in past with other podcasters of how it can be bad to be privatized. I don't know why Trump keeps pushing it so much. I mean, I think he just wants to make money, or like the post office, just all about make money. But hey, there is a lot of positions at the post office that are overpaid. I mean, there could be some restructuring for sure. I heard the mail trucks are pretty expensive, in particular the electric one. I believe there definitely could be some improvement. Definitely, the hiring process is a joke. So I don't agree with privatization. I just wish we could zero in more into like the current issues better, especially here in my local office. I mean, fix the hiring process. We can cut back on overtime hours. It shouldn't take 3 months to get someone in the door. Right. And then by the time you get them, they might have quit because they got sick of waiting. I feel like that's kind of like neural problem number 1. And then they only like to hire them near Christmas. So then they start near peak season and then maybe want to quit, especially when winter hits where I live. Like winter breaks you. Like this job isn't for everyone. Right. So, hire them in the summer, get them more experience.
Yeah, and I would. I think all that sounds great. And what I would say, you mentioned that what people really should be focusing on about the TA is, you're going to be starting negotiations for the next contract in basically a year, and so people need to be making sure that they're getting active in their union and making sure that they're communicating what you want in the next contract soon. That you get good leadership, you get active leadership, and that's what I would focus similarly on. The political engagement on the privatization issue and getting your local active and being part of your local. I'll say that I am a member of a federal employee union, AFGE, and we're in a red state. Our congressional representatives are all Republicans. I would love to have a Republican a Republican voter on our legislative committee. I think, fortunate, whatever, for whatever reason, most people who attend our union meetings and volunteer for the committees are not conservative and are not Republican. But I would personally, if I could get a Republican on my legislative committee to then be our ambassador to the Republicans in Congress, I would like that, me personally. And you know me, I'm not a Republican, right? And so I would encourage you to talk to your local leadership and see what opportunities there are for you to be involved in in your local's political work, particularly around potentially coming attacks on the Postal Service. And so I think that, getting active in the union is a pretty good general response to most problems. So yeah, appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, nicely put. I mean, that's nice to hear. And yeah, I myself, obviously voted for or kind of, back. Yeah, I know I definitely want to poke at them and say, hey, support unions more. I did try getting a Republican representative to talk to my local union in one of the meetings. There was a meeting recently where they brought in a Democrat activist, I would call it, where they're telling us to vote for Democrats for the Postal Service. It's fair, both sides can have their arguments, but I couldn't get someone in my county at the Republican Party to then have someone come there and talk about why they should, have postal workers vote for Republicans. It's frustrating. And I even sent them all the information. It's on the ALC website where it talks about the bill and what we support and what we're wanting. I gave all the information to them and I still couldn't get someone. So it is frustrating. In even my local area, some local experience that might have had. So I'm trying. So it's good to hear that you're doing some sort of effort to it too.
All right.
Cross
Thanks for the
parties
call, Harley. Appreciate
working together. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. 844-899-8857 is the phone number if you would like to get where Harley was. We had somebody that literally just dropped off. I don't know if they got busy with something else or if they thought the conversation was going to go longer than it did. 844-899-8857 is the phone number if you would like to call in. We Are Ronan says... Claydonius says, looking at funneling more money to billionaires, that's for sure. Speaking about privatizing the Postal Service, that would be what I would think the motivation is. We Are Ronan says, privatizing the Postal Service is unconstitutional. There would probably be lawsuits about it if he could get it through Congress. I think that's a big if. If he could get it through Congress, I think there would be lawsuits about it, and I think there's a good argument. I'm not a legal scholar, though, so I don't know. Scott Fiera says, concepts of a plan. He has no plan. Speaking about privatizing Postal Service. Maxwell Olson says, these MFs can't pass a budget with an 8-seat majority. They'll have a 2-seat majority in January and only 5 when vacancies are filled by the summer. Fit Over 50 says, how much would it cost politicians to deliver their political mail using FedEx and UPS? Well, like I said, it costs like 67 cents to mail a letter with the Postal Service. And if you mail the same letter with FedEx or UPS, I think it's legit like 15 or 20 bucks. So you're talking about 1,000% increase or something on that. It's a ridiculous amount. Quirky Geek Girl says if they went private, they would close down post offices in rural areas first. Absolutely. We Are Ronan agrees. Fit Over 50, we read that one already. James Coble says the pension really sucks for anyone hired after 2014. Paying 450% more into the same pension program takes 7 years into retirement to break even. Fit Over 50 says I started in 2006 at 19 an hour. Today, CCA started at 19 an hour. Is that true? You started at 19 an hour in 2006. That's crazy. Wow. That's wild.
Jacob, I had a couple things.
Adam, go ahead.
Get done. I had a couple things to add on the Postal Service. I appreciate Harley's call. Obviously, I, disagree with his decision to vote for Trump, but I totally agree with what you shared, Jacob, that it is important that conservative union members speak up when it comes to these sort of issues. And, I agree. I absolutely, think it's important that we have folks of every persuasion who are talking about these issues. So if you're listening and you are a conservative, but you still want to keep your pension, you still want to keep your health care, you still want to keep your due process, you still want to keep anything that's important to you, absolutely get involved in the local and get involved in these political efforts. If you helped elect these people, it's especially on you to help us hold them accountable, right? Because if you voted for them, they theoretically are more likely to pay attention to you than they would be to me if I didn't vote for them. I think many of us listening probably recognize that ultimately it's wealthy, powerful interests who have their ear and not everyday constituents, even if you're voting for them, frankly. And I think, the caller's experience of lack of response, not getting through to these folks, sending them information and not working, like that's a pretty typical thing. That's how a lot of us are treated by our legislators and our, policymakers. So, I just wanted to put that out there. But also on this broader issue of privatization, part of it is that we can't forget is that privatization is always accompanied by sabotage of public services, right? And often the sabotage happens first. The public services are deliberately underfunded, are overstretched. They are sabotaged in various ways to either make them more inefficient, to hurt their popularity with the public, whatever the situation may be. But they are deliberately harmed in order to increase the appetite for the privatization. And the Postal Service is a great example of this because for over a decade, the United States Postal Service has been plagued with the onerous burden of pre-funding its retiree healthcare benefits. And this comes from a law back in 2006, the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act. And that mandate requires the Postal Service to pre-fund its retiree healthcare benefits 75 years in advance. 75 years in advance. Like nowhere else does this happen. This is not a normal thing to pay for the retirement health care for individuals who haven't even been born yet, let alone entered the workforce. And so since 2013, in particular, this pre-funding mandate is responsible for most of the Postal Service's net losses. And it has defaulted on its pre-funding payments since 2012. No other federal agency or private sector business pre-funds its retirement benefits like this. And it is making it really, really unstable and difficult for the Postal Service. The Postal Service was actually doing quite well before this bill, this law was enacted by Congress back during the George W. Bush administration. And that was part of the problem, right? The Postal Service was doing pretty well and makes it harder to privatize, right? Makes it harder to justify. So you put this into place. And suddenly it looks like the Postal Service is massively in debt and just is in a deep hole and can't climb out. And it's like, well, yeah, you put them in the hole. You dug the hole, put them in there, and then you complain that they can't get out. And of course, you have this, solution, which is to introduce the profit motive and ensure public dollars are going into private pockets. But there is another solution, which would certainly help this situation. It's called the USPS Fairness Act. You can find more info about it. I know the APWU has a solid fact sheet on their website about it. It passed the House last year, is my understanding, but stalled in the Senate. And basically, it would repeal this pre-funding mandate. So the Postal Service would then be able to focus on investing and innovating.
Well, the Postal Service has already repealed the pre-funding mandate. In 2022, they did that.
So it's already been repealed since 2022. Okay, well, that's great news because this happened, for over a decade. They were pre-funding these retiree benefits and it put them in a significant disadvantage because it was a pretty profitable agency. Not that the goal was to be profitable, obviously. And I think that's something else is like, because public services are for the public good, you're right to point to the rural routes and the non-profitable routes that absolutely will be cut. Like, if you live in a hard to reach area, the Postal Service isn't making money off delivering your mail and your medicines and your Christmas shopping. And they have no incentive to continue doing that if they're no longer a public service. So yeah, those were some things that came to my mind. And but yeah, I appreciate your sentiment. If you are a Republican union member, you have a responsibility and a right to speak up and hopefully influence the legislators and the politicians that you're helping to elect. You made that decision. You thought they were the best person for the job. So you got to help us hold them accountable for that.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.